What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Generation 9 has given us Terastallizing, which to me is one of, if not the best gimmicks that Pokemon has introduced. It's not too overpowered and it's accessible for every Pokemon out there. And one of the best showcases of this feature is allowing each of the gym leaders to Terastallize a Pokemon to become their specified type, allowing for some really fun strategies. But that got me thinking. With having this much fun in the Paldea region, what if every region's gym leaders were able to Terastallize their Pokémon? So starting in Kanto, to either add or replace a temporary rock type onto Brock's team, I think a Machop would fit best. It is a common favorite of the Hiker trainer class, and you might say that you can't do that when Bruno has a Machamp, but he literally stole 2 of Brock's aces, so I think we're fine. So moving over to Misty and Cerulean, I think a believable water type could come from Ekans, since water snakes are a thing after all. Now for Lieutenant Surge, changing something into an electric type, I'm leaning towards Sandslash. Obviously in this exercise I'm going to prioritize Pokemon introduced in that region, even if some of them might be usable, like maybe making a Lightning Meltan from Let's Go. So Erica concerned me a bit, but once I remembered that Farfetch'd was a thing, no other grass Tera type would do from the Kanto region. But luckily for us, Sabrina already had a Venomoth on her team, so I'm not gonna waste much time when the gym leaders line it up so perfectly. So then we have Koga, and even with so many poison types, I still think Lickitung could be perfect, since it is claimed to have poisonous saliva after all. Next comes Blaine, who was a bit harder, but I do think that a Fearow could fit the bill. I just love the idea of flames coming off of this ferocious bird, and I'm sure that it could even be a reference to Moltres, who Blaine would definitely look up to. And of course, we then have Giovanni, and this one seems fairly obvious with Kangaskhan Terastallizing into a ground type. He's already had this Pokemon throughout the game, so he might as well bring it into the fold here. But then the Elite Four are also type specialists, so they could participate as well, and it's a lot easier than ever before since they've all already been playing this game. Since Lorelei could Terastallize her Slowbro, Bruno, as we already pointed out, has an Onix, Agatha would likely choose her Golbat to be a ghost, and then Lance could use his Aerodactyl. The Champion Blue does not have a specific type emphasis, so we'll avoid talking about those kinds of trainers. So then we have the Johto region, and Falkner is the first gym leader. I don't love this one, but there aren't too many options, so I think maybe one of the Unknown could work, since they already float. Not a lot of move potential there, but the Ruins of Alph are nearby, so it could work a little bit. Then there's Bugsy, and I think they could use an Apom as a bug type. This links it to the close-by ability of learning Headbutt to actually get an Apom, and it's no worse off than Katie having a Teddiursa. Whitney comes next, and I think along with her dreaded Miltank, she could use a Flaffy to become a pure normal type in her gym. Morty then comes after that for a Ghost-type specialist, and I could see Wobbuffet being a good choice here, making its retaliation tactic quite a bit trickier to get a handle on. Then you move over to Cyanwood for Chuck, and I think giving him a Granbull that would Terastallize into a fighting type actually meshes really well, and this Bulldog could help build out his small team. Jasmine is the next gym leader, and I think a Steel-type Donphan would be an amazing pairing that would not only fit her, but also be an Easter egg for the paradoxical future form. So then Price is next in line, and I think an Ursaring is just the perfect pick. Basically becoming a giant polar bear, so that would be pretty fun. Then of course Claire is last, and I think it would be simple enough for her to Terastallize a Gyarados like she has in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. As for their Elite Four, Will is really the only one that will give us trouble, but I think a nice Porygon 2 would be able to fit with this Psychic-type trainer quite solidly. Koga was kind enough to have a Forretress to change, as well as Bruno with his Onix, and Karen's Gengar to become a Dark-type. Lance is here again, but this time I would say his Charizard would become a dragon instead. So now we're at Hoenn starting with Roxanne, and I think maybe the best early Pokemon to use would be Seedot, to further harden its tough outer shell to make it a full-on rock type. And then Brawly isn't far behind, so we could give him a Loudred to become a fighting type. That would probably be a decent enough challenge for the second gym. Watson comes next, and I actually think that Linoone would be a really good fit. It usually tries to weaken electric moves using Mud Sport, but now you can just flip that on its head. Flannery to me was a bit worrying until I remembered that this region had Volbeat, so turning this Firefly Pokemon into an actual fire type would be long overdue. As for Norman, the normal type user, I think it'd be funny to use a Mawile. Turning a Pokemon with one of the most complex type matchups into one of the simplest just kind of seems fun to me. Then Winona comes up in Fortree City, and to me it's actually a great fit to use a Chimecho, since they're already up in the air, and they are literal wind chimes, so it's pretty perfect for the flying type. Liza and Tate were not so spot on, but I do think that Castform would work as a psychic type here, and they could even switch the form to the relevant weather based on their rocky aces. And lastly, I think Wallace would just click perfectly with a Masquerain. Getting to Terastallize back into a water type would be well deserved for this bug. Juan was not so easy, but I think perhaps a Swalot could fill in. I mean, its body is basically made of liquid anyway. So for the Elite Four, Sydney could probably get a Breloom, mostly because it lines up pretty well with the other grass types on his team. Then Phoebe could probably have a Kecleon, and then Glacia maybe gets a Gorbis. As for Drake, I think a Seviper would actually fit really well as a dragon type. And then Mr. Steven, as the champion, would do well to Terastallize his Armaldo that he already has into the steel typing. Sinnoh starts the 4th generation with Rourke, and really all I've got here is a Munchlax. It's a Pokemon that doesn't really show up that much in the early game otherwise, so I think seeing it would be nice even if it is a rock type. Now Gardenia, on the other hand, has a much better option in Burmy. It being covered in leaves already makes it ideal to be a grass type. Then Maylene usually comes next, and I think that Lopunny would be a natural fit to change into a fighting type. But maybe that's just the Megaform talking. Crasher Wake is a standout, but I think a decent fit would be Krogunk, both for the frog's connection to water and the dry skin ability, but also Pastoria has this Pokemon as sort of a mascot as well, so I think it all just clicks. As for Fantina, the Ghost-type user, I would say maybe a Gallade could be used here, since it's not really shown off properly in Sinnoh, but if that's too powerful, then maybe we can just downgrade it to a Kirlia. Then we move over to Byron, and it may not be the cool thing, but I do think a Kricketune would actually make a lot of sense. Canalave is still very near its natural habitat, and those sword arms powered up by the steel type would be much more threatening. But good for us, Candace and Volkner have a Medicham and an Ambipom already, so that's done. And our good fortune continues in the Sinnoh Elite Four as well, with Aaron Terastallizing his Drapion, Bertha her Sudowoodo, and of course Flint with his Drifblim, since it almost seems like that's half the reason why they invented Terastallizing at all. But Lucian is the only one that needed help. And I think once again, Porygon Z would be a good fit for a Psychic Trainer, just like its previous stage was. So then we have the Unova region, and right away, the Striaton brothers are able to Terastallize their Lillipup into whichever type they supposedly represent in their first gym. As for the other first gym, Charon could probably get away with having a Riolu turn into a normal type, due to their habitat being so close by at the ranch. The second gym is Lenora, and it may not be the most exciting choice, but I do think a Purloin is just about the only option to make sense at that juncture in the game. However, the other second gym leader, Roxy, I think could probably go with a Clink. This works for the industrial setting and almost makes it seem like it's been rusted, so that's pretty cool. So we converge on the third gym with Berg, and I'm gonna say Ferroseed would probably be the pick here. It would be an overall downgrade to become a bug type, but Fire would only be regularly super effective, so that's funny. Then there's Elisa, and I would say that a surprisingly applicable choice would come from Behem. It is an alien from outer space, so I could totally buy it having lightning powers of some kind. Of course, Clay is next, and I actually think it could work for him to Terastallize a Heatmor, since this Pokemon seems to live underground as it is anyway. Skyla comes next, and I think it would make a lot of sense for her to have an Electric. Not only is this Pokemon already airborne, but we just passed through its home on the way to get to her gym. Originally, the 7th gym is Bryson, who I would say should Terastallize a Cinccino, because it looks like it's wearing winter wear already, and it does get access to some ice-type moves. Then we sometimes have Drayden as the 7th gym, but sometimes we also share it with Iris, so for these two, I would say they should either get a Braviary or Mandibuzz as a dragon type, whichever one isn't normally caught in that version. And then of course for the sequels, Marlin is the 8th gym leader, so I would give him a Maractus to Terastallize, since cacti are pretty notorious for their water retention. So that just leaves the Elite Four, starting with Marshall, who would make a Darmanitan a fighting type. That's pretty scary. Chantal would ghostify a Garbodor, while our friend Caitlin would turn a Lilligant into a Psychic type. That just leaves Grimsley to turn Basculin into a Dark type, which I think fits really well with this otherwise unremarkable fish. So we jump to 3D in the Kalos region, which gives us Viola, who I think should maybe use a Bunnelby as a bug type. mostly because there aren't many other good early choices. However, maybe early doesn't matter quite as much, because next we will have Grant, who I would say should get a Bergmite. I could totally see this little chunk becoming a rock type, plus it's got that Hisuian connection. The third gym is Korrina, and I would say that she could turn a Furfrou into a fighting type, mostly because it's surprisingly forgotten for how important it seemed to Kalos at the time. But then with Ramos being the next gym, I would give him a grass-type Floette, which is just perfect. Clement comes next, and I want to say that he would maybe have an Azumarill, mostly because of how funny the parallels would be to Raichu and the whole Peekaboo thing. Now Valerie comes up, and it might not fit as well, but I do think it would be interesting for her to use a Pangoro, mostly because it takes a 4x weakness and turns it into its own typing. The 7th gym is Olympia, and I think that she could easily pull off having a Psychic-type Trevenant, and that just leaves us with Wulfric. And I think that Carbink is another forgotten Kalos entry, but one that I could definitely believe cloaking itself with the Ice typing. So that moves us over to the Elite Four of the region, and for the first one, I would give Malva a Skuntank, who is tied to fire more than most poison types, and then Seabold could easily use a Malamar as a temporary water type. I then think that Wickstrom could use a Steel-type Crawdaunt, and Miss Drasna could take on a Dragon Aerodactyl. So that'll do it for all of the Gen 6 type specialists. And then of course, while there were trial captains in Alola, you really only fought them much later after the trials, so there's not a lot of opportunity to Terastallize in battle, which just leaves us with the Galar region. So we begin with Milo, and not to overcomplicate things, I think a nice grass-type Wooloo would be just fine, because the whole gym task is based around that Pokemon anyway, so just include it in the battle. Then we have Nessa, who seems like she could be totally compatible with the Sea-dwelling Pincurchin as a new water type, and then Kabu the Fire Master was a bit harder. But for some reason, I feel like Beware would bizarrely fit him really well. Maybe it's just the fluffy ability that's linking it in my mind, but a happy flaming bear running towards you just seems hysterical to me. Then the next gym was split, first with B, who I would give a fighting-type Thievul, maybe it's just the coloring that makes me think that, but then I feel Alistair, the other gym leader, could pretty well get away with having an Indeedee change into a ghost type for his gym. Right after that, we go up to Opal, and this fairy-type user should have an Audino, keeping alive the Mega that the Galar region threw out. We then have another split, with Gordy being a rock gym, and I actually think that he could get away with having a Cloyster on his team, with having such a hard shell, but it's also usually an ice type, which links it back to the other leader, Melanie. And maybe you won't see it on this one, but I think that a Slurpuff could be really fun as an ice type, because that makes it into a frozen dessert, more akin to the Vanillish line, so it makes sense in my head. Now, Piers did sit out of the whole Gigantamaxing gimmick, but maybe that's just because he was leaving room for Terastallizing. I think a perfect partner in that regard would be Toxtricity, since the whole gym is based around having a rock concert, so a Dark-type guitarist would help out a lot. And that finally takes us over to Raihan, who has actually been participating all along, since he had a regular old Sandaconda on his team. I mean, there was also a Gigalith, but of the two, I would say that this coiled-up serpent is a bit more deserving of the Dragon power-up for the final gym leader. So, those are what I think each of the type specialists across all the regions would do if they were able to Terastallize like those of the Paldea region, using this latest gimmick to its fullest potential. So if Tera Types do stick around, or if we have some kind of remake in this generation, we could even see some of these exact setups happen in the near future. Which Tera Pokemon would you give your favorite gym leaders? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.